Vasudevendra yogindram natva jnana pradam gurum mumukshunam hitarthaya tattvabodho bhidiyate. So why do you think that we always start with a invocation before we begin the program? Why do we start with, why don't we just go straight into the verse? Why do we always start a text with a invocation? Is there any reason for this? Would you like to share? Yes, please. Yes, please, Tom.
It sets the stage, mental stage, and an environment conducive to learning such a high topic.
Of course. Wonderful, Paul. So it is a preparation. It's a preparation. It reduces our subjectivity. It reminds us, hey, we're coming for one purpose for the next couple of minutes. And for the moment, for the time being, let's put our subjectivity away. Let's become a deserving instrument. Let's become a recipient of the information. And meanwhile, let's put our stuff aside. What we heard, all of our experiences, who we have listened before. I've seen, unfortunately or fortunately, when someone steps in, and if this first incidentally doesn't seem that important, but the most important, if this first step is not initiated, then everything else is it's not going to work, because they're saying, who is this person? I've heard this before, get on with it. And this is the whole complex narrative begins after. So every time we start with Vasudeva, we're initiating and we're becoming, both you and myself, equal. We're becoming equal deserving recipients for something useful to come out of this, something useful, something beneficial, something productive. Okay, now speaking of productivity, we have been asked to be somewhat productive in reference to last session of talking about some words that we discussed. Nothing too much, very simple. This is our third session. We have yet to get into the program, and we have spoken about Viveka, Adhikari, and Anitya. And we asked the question, based on what we've heard, what is Viveka? What is Viveka? Would someone like to tell me?
Viveka is the ability to discern or to separate.
Discern or to separate or to categorize. In fact, this Viveka, its root actually not only means it also means to clarity. So not only to separate, but also to clarity. So in other words, by the process of separating, by the process of differentiating, what comes out, what comes? Clarity. So Viveka is a process by which clarity is established. So therefore, Viveka. What else did we say Viveka is? This important word.
Discriminative inquiry.
Discriminative inquiry, very good. Does it mean discrimination?
No, more discernment.
No. Discernment. So you have to be very careful with our words, because words nowadays get thrown around without thinking about what we really said. And so by redefining these words, they take on a whole different feel, if you've noticed. The moment we said discriminative inquiry, you probably said, I've not heard that before. And so it engages a fresh perspective on these words. Okay? So discriminative inquiry, and what's the effect of this inquiry? Is it an experience, or is it a cognitive type of inquiry?
Cognitive.
It's good. And what does it mean? Can someone give us an example of a cognitive inquiry in reference to the example that we used last week.
So it's the ability to discriminate between what's real and what's unreal, or
Yes, very good, Ricky. So what is real? So now we are, still investigating what is real and what is unreal. We're yet to get into that. And we simply said that Viveka is a cognitive, it's a cognitive process. And we use the example of the crystal and the cloth. So this means that the crystal, through its cognitive knowledge, does it have to get rid of the cloth? Does it have to eliminate the cloth? No, there's no question of eliminating anything. So only if the crystal believes that the attributes of the cloth have been passed onto it, only then it's going to act out of this erroneous notion and try to what? Get rid of something that it intrinsically doesn't have. You understand? It intrinsically doesn't have the redness of that cloth. It doesn't have the conditionalities of the cloth. So this means no matter how many efforts the crystal applies onto itself, it will never get rid of anything because it's not contaminated by anything. It is already pure. So therefore, there's no question of getting rid of one's thoughts. Hey, leave your thoughts alone. The thoughts are like the cloth. The emotions are like the cloth. The body is like the cloth. The memories are like the cloth. Your life is like the cloth. Everything you know is like the cloth. Your karma is like the cloth. You understand? So this means by understanding, yes, Kerry, I know, understanding through cognitive discernment, we need not get rid of anything. We simply recognize what is mine and who am I by nature. I am that one in whose presence all of these conditions and these conditionalities, they appear and they go. They appear and they go. Kerry?
Well, the only thing about that metaphor, is I just feel like, a crystal has no cognition at all. And so they're all body.
Yes. So what Kerry is now bringing up is, you see, every example is to be used in the right context. So when we use an example, we're only meant to open up a possibility to help your mind think, to help your mind bring it onto something that it can latch onto, something it can grasp. So if we just talk these abstracts, then the mind's kind of like, I don't know what you're talking about. Can you give us an example? So now if I use the example of the crystal, the next question the mind brings up, yeah, but we are sentient and crystal is insentient. So that is not the point. You understand? That was not what the example was trying to show. It was just trying to show metaphorically, right? This recognition of Atman and Anatman. You understand? So in other words, don't let your mind turn an example for what the teacher did not intend it for. Did I say that the crystal is now, do we go into the conversation the crystal is now alive? And, do we go beyond the simple illustration that the crystal, except that the crystal does not mistake itself for the cloth? Understand, Kerry? Okay, so Kerry,
I won't look into things. Okay.
Okay, so Kerry, so this is very important, and it happens very often. I tell you, very often is that when a teacher uses an example, this example, then the mind starts to question. It starts to question the example. Yeah, but how does this now contrast with that? So don't let the mind, just stick with that isolated case of the example and just look at it for what it was meant to kind of, show you. Don't now go, yeah, but it's not sentient. Yeah, but it's not alive. This is not what it was meant to do. Okay. And then yes, Meena.
Yeah. What is the relation between vicharaha and vivekaha? When we say Viveka is discriminative inquiry, and this inquiry we do with the help of our thoughts, right? Which are, if my thoughts are polluted, can my discriminative inquiry lead to the right decision or result, which is known as Viveka, which is something like we use it in the positive sense?
So if I've gotten the question correct, this vichara, right? Vichara and Viveka, these two words. So you're asking what is the relationship? So now this relationship, it's more like what is the difference, right? What's the difference between vichara and Viveka?
Yeah, because I'm thinking of a scenario where my vichara or thoughts, for example, they are polluted. I believe that, unethical means lead to a wealthy life. For example, this is a thought, this is a vichara.
Yeah, that is a thought,
on the basis of this vichara or thought, I start my discriminative inquiry.
Okay, so now for simplicity, we can say that vichara pertains to anityam, right? So thoughts about dharma, thoughts about your life, thoughts about what should be done, what is the right way of conduct. And Viveka is specifically in reference to anitya and nitya, which we will now go into, between Atman and Anatman. Okay, so Viveka specifically only to is Atman and Anatman, and vichara is just your day-to-day thoughts about various things.
So if a person is never exposed to this Vedantic study or about Atman or Anatma thing, should we assume that the person has no Viveka? Or he's not exercising Viveka?
So see, everyone has some level of discernment just to be pursuing the spiritual path, right? In fact, I want to just get into this, how, slowly by this maturity, this emotional maturity, one starts to recognize the impermanence of things. And so slowly they will start to look for something bigger. They will hear some words, they will hear Buddhism, they will hear Hinduism, they will hear different, they will see a monk, like, why are you shaving your head? And they will see something's going on, like these swamis. So this will slowly start to grow on the person, and they will catch on, hey, there's got to be something more than just this world. And so this observation, right, if the person is smart enough, they have a certain level of maturity, this observation will cause them to eventually start to question. And this questioning of what is more than just all of this questioning is what starts to develop this Viveka. Okay. Okay, and then the word adhikari. Anyone wants to say something?
Those who are ready for knowledge.
Say again, Carla.
Those who are ready for the knowledge, those who are open to learning.
Yeah. Very good. So those who are ready, and now what qualifies, what makes a person ready, right? What makes them genuinely ready? And we said there are certain conditions. There are fourfold conditions. They are called in this book sadhana chatushtaya. So fourfold conditions that make a person ready. And what do we mean? Ready for what? Do you want to answer this? Ready for what?
To receive the knowledge. Truth.
Okay. Yeah, but how? How will they receive the knowledge?
From the Guru and from the scriptures.
Okay, good. Now, if we go back to the verse, right? Remember this, sadhana sampanna adhikarina moksha sadhana bhutam tattvaviveka prakaram, right? Remember this verse? Now, tattvaviveka prakaram. Okay, so in other words, adhikari, who has sampanna, who is endowed with sadhana chatushtaya, is capable, is a deserving candidate for what?
Moksha, liberation.
Yeah, but how will moksha be gained? What's the means for moksha?
Through Tattvabodha.
Tattvabodha, good. So this is the answer that I was looking for. So Tattvabodha, prakaram is the method. So in other words, what makes the person qualified or makes them ready to perform Tattva Viveka? Fourfold conditions. What will this Tattva Viveka give? Moksha. Do you understand the order here? Look at this order. Now, look at this, how it's different than what we suppose, what we call modern Vedanta, right? Modern Vedanta. What do? We go straight into, and we talk about moksha. Neo, right? The modern Vedanta. Hey, welcome in my satsang. Let's talk about moksha. But look what we're doing here. We're saying, hey, stop. One needs to become ready. And then we ask the question, what are the conditions to become ready? And then we go through sadhana chatushtaya, these fourfold conditions that we are going to go into. And then we still don't stop there. We say, now, what will readiness give me? What will readiness qualify me to do? The answer is Tattva Viveka. And then what would Tattva Viveka give? It will give moksha. You see the order here? This is called a methodology, a means of knowledge. It is order. One, next, 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 next. There's no skipping. So therefore, this order is to be followed so that the knowledge can be properly ascertained. Otherwise, it is incomplete. And then the person, unfortunately, will walk away thinking that they have sort of kind of understood, but it's partial. And we cannot afford partial understanding. Okay, the stakes are too high. We cannot afford partial understanding. We need full understanding. Therefore, we go into the first means for this understanding is we asked last week, the verse, we said, sadhana chatushtayam kim. Okay, so what is, so this is page 13 of the book. So what is sadhana? Sadhana, we said, is a means by which something is gained. Okay, a means, just a means. It's a vehicle by which something is gained. So what are these fourfold means that will qualify, that will make you ready to perform Tattva Viveka? Does this make sense, this question? In other words, what will enable me to do Tattva Viveka? Discern. Tattva means reality. Viveka means to apply a discriminative inquiry on reality. Okay. In other words, what will enable me? And then we started the inquiry last week, and we said, Nitya Anitya Vastu Vivekaha. Okay. So Vivekaha we know. So in other words, we are applying Viveka on what? Nitya and Anitya. And then we started to inquire about the word Anitya. Okay, so we are now all on the same page. This is where we stopped last week. And we said Anitya is
something that does not stay same in the three stages.
Excellent. Something that does not stay the same in the three periods of time, or you can even call it the three states of experience: in the waking, the dream, and the deep sleep. You understand? So something, in other words, something that always varies, changes, something that undergoes fluctuations, something that goes through a period of ups and downs, something that changes texture, quality, quantity. So now look at this. Just listen to this question. Suppose you say, hey, today I feel more clear than yesterday. I am now enlightened. Do you hear that question?
Yeah.
Today I really feel clear. I am enlightened. What is that?
Impermanent.
Was that condition true yesterday?
No.
No. Therefore it is what? Anitya. It is anitya. So what does this mean? It means there will never be a time when you will be more. Okay, because nitya, right, as we will see, nitya is you. Nitya is Atman, I. There will never be a time when you are more than now. Because suppose you say in the future, suppose, now we will talk about time, what is future? Is there a future? Because today was a future from the standpoint of yesterday. Tomorrow, and when I say future tomorrow, right? What happens when I'm there tomorrow? It's going to be the present. So a future is just a figment of imagination of our mind. So where's the question of future here? Because the future, if I'm thinking that from the standpoint of what? The present right now. So now if someone says, I will become enlightened one day. Think about this. I will become enlightened one day. To become enlightened one day means I was not enlightened another day. You see that? So this means the entire thought, the entire line of thinking, the entire logic of this individual who thinks like that, it is what? It is still anityam. It is still that which doesn't obtain in all three periods of time, all the time.
Is there any reason that you don't use the word impermanent?
Impermanent, I was just going to use now, actually, at the end of this to kind of put a summary to it. Okay. So impermanent is a lovely word. I was going to use impermanent. So yeah, just wait for that. Okay. So anitya. So now what is this anitya? Okay. So it is a basic understanding that ultimately all I'm really seeking is what? Behind all of these things that are being sought, what am I really, really seeking?
The truth.
The truth, freedom from a sense of limitation. And now, what does anitya give? What is anitya in the first place? Anitya, we said last week, it is always that which is isolated to itself. In other words, how many anityas are there? Infinite. So in other words, by looking for something, what happens? One becomes an eternal seeker. And one does not want to become an eternal seeker, but rather a seeker of the eternal. You understand? So in other words, look at this. Now, if anitya is being sought, that means whatever I gain is only one version of itself. That means there's always going to be a different version, right? A different possibility, a different experience, that lasts so much time, longer, shorter. Suppose you look for samadhi, right? Suppose you look for nirvikalpa samadhi. This the 8th step of Yoga Patanjali Sutra. Now, suppose you gain some years of practice, of course, it requires some time, and you gain that samadhi for suppose 30 minutes, right? Now, and then you tell me, number one, you say, I experienced eternity. How can you experience eternity? How can you experience eternity for 30 minutes? Why not 31? Then what is 31 minutes? Is 31 minutes more eternity than 30 minutes? Understand? What about those who experienced it for 30 and those who experienced it 35 next door? Are they somehow experiencing a longer eternity that lasts 5 minutes longer than your eternity? You see the level of thinking that this individual falls for? So even to say that I've experienced this eternity or this experience, this oneness experience, okay, whatever experience they call it, they usually call it a oneness experience or, experience that everything was so, words don't do it justice, how beautiful it was. All of this is just that time-bound experience falling in the category of what? Anityam. Therefore, this person still is yet to learn what is nityam. Okay? So what else is anityam before we go into nityam? It's okay, we're not in a hurry. We can talk about this. What else is anityam? Okay? What's heaven? What is heaven now? You want heaven? Seventh heaven? You want Brahma Loka? What is Brahma Loka? Suppose you go, in the seventh heaven you heard, right? Seventh heaven. Did you ever wonder where this came from? Seventh heaven. They have this in Islam also. Seventh heaven. It's supposed to be the highest world, the highest world of experience. That means the most amount of punyam, the most amount of a goodness that you can get, the most amount of reward that you can get on earth, The highest you can go is Brahmaloka, the seventh heaven. Right? It doesn't matter if you think this is, you believe this or not. It doesn't matter. But suppose there is, worlds, and this earth is just one of those worlds, just one, right? And now there is 7 other kind of higher, right, worlds. There is, there's a Pitraloka, Swargaloka, there's Satyaloka, and there's Brahmaloka. Now, suppose you go suppose Swargaloka, heaven. We talk about heaven, in different religions and different, different even sects of Vedanta, right? You've got this Bhagavad Gita as it is. You heard that? Bhagavad Gita as it is. Okay, I'll reserve that talk a little bit later, and I'll show you the talk about that a little bit. Now, you suppose you go to heaven, right? And then now, now what? Now what? Okay, now suppose we're all in heaven. Now what? Who's still there in heaven? Who's still in heaven? You are. So in other words, if I am the problem, right? If I am the problem, then what is being taken to heaven? I am. So in other words, the problems don't leave. Because in heaven, the same mind is there. The body is different, but the same mind is there. So whatever thoughts, whatever psychological issues the fella had on earth, they're still going to be up there, wherever that up or down is in reference to where you are. Okay? So in other words, if I am the problem, then only I can be the solution. If ignorance is the problem, then what is the only solution here? Action is not a problem. Because how many actions do you need to apply in order to gain limitlessness? Tell me this. How many actions do you need to gain? Because every action is limited, right? Is there any unlimited action? Is there any limitless action that you can do? No. You know why? Because how long does an action last? Only a couple of 5 minutes. If you do it for 5 hours, it's not 6 hours. If it's 6 hours, it's not 7 hours. So by definition, that every action is limited by time, that qualifies it to not be a limitless action. Therefore, no action can ever bring you a limitless result. And here we're talking about what? Gaining limitlessness, that which is not bound by time, that which is eternal. So therefore, any action, by definition, being not eternal, meaning being time-bound, can never give you what? Eternity. Okay? Now, what else do we say here? Okay? And now forget about heaven. Heaven is also a time-bound experience. Okay? You come back, and then we have to look for more you have to look for another teacher. You forget about everything that happened in heaven. So what really took place, I don't know. But suppose, okay, let's stick on earth, okay? Suppose you gain the highest position here. Now, what's the highest position by worldly standards? What's the highest position that we can gain in here? Maybe become a president, okay? President of, say, well, maybe used to be USA. I don't know what country you have to be a president of today to kind of be in the highest position. But suppose the president of USA, right? Now, okay, so now we're president of USA. So now what happens, okay? You've got a nitya for 4 years. You've got a 4-year period there. But still, what happens? What's the issue? Still, the fella is subject to mosquitoes. Okay, it depends where they live, of course. There's not in the White House, but they're subject to colds. They're subject to, getting more votes, getting polls. They're subject to kind of, opposing party. You have to deal with that. So much stress. What happened? I've got the highest position on earth. I've got the highest form of anityam possible. And look how many problems just arose. Has anything been really solved? The answer is no, because as we said, anityam, how many anityams is there? Infinite. So it is only one possibility out of infinite. Now look at this. Look at this question. Suppose I say to you, do you want one choice that gives you infinity, or infinite choices which give you limitation? One choice, you got only one. In fact, you got no choice. You got one choice. It's as good as no choice. You got one choice and gives you infinity. Or you've got infinite choices, but each of those infinite choices give you a little bit, give you a limitation. Which one do you want? First one or the second one? Well, I think the answer is obvious, isn't it? And look at this. If you take one choice that gives you infinity, that infinity includes all of the other infinites. Whereas if I opt in for the second method and I choose and I opt in for infinite choices, which give me a little bit, then I'm only getting a little bit each time. If I go for the first choice, if I go for the number one, then I'm getting all of those possibilities at once. So it's a no-brainer. One choice that gives infinity, or infinite choices whereby each of them give limitation. One limitation after another, after another, after another, after another, after another, next life, another, 100 lifetimes later, another. The person kind of gets it. Now they want heaven. Now another. Now there's someone higher in heaven. You have to go to the minister. You got maybe heavenly mosquitoes there. Maybe they don't go teet, but they probably sing, Hare Krishna. And then you go to the minister. You complain and say to them, hey, look, how long are these mosquitoes going to be around? And they say, well, because the bodies don't die here, you have to put up with this for 500,000 more years. And you go, oh my God, how many more punyam points do I have? And they say 1 more million years of punyam points. And then you have to put up 1 million years worth of whatever goes on in heaven, because, these bodies are a lot more capable than our bodies are. And then you realize in heaven, hey, I just want to get out of here. I can hardly wait to go back to earth and follow a proper means of knowledge, the one that we are doing right now, so that I can end this business of infinite versions of anityam, which all provide me limitations whereby being involved in them, I recognize that they are only capable of bringing so much happiness until I realize there's nothing really there. It's actually essenceless. There's no essence. There's no real tangible joy there. It's just surface. It's very small, and then you kind of grow out of it, and then you finally find a teacher, and in one life, what happens? The teacher says, hey, let me point out this anityam. Now, are you clear what anityam is? And while listening to the teacher, you kind of understand, yeah, he's making a good point. They're making a good point. And then the teacher says, one life comes when each individual in their life approaches a teacher who shows them this reality, whereby the recognition of this reality taking place, only one life alone, moksha takes place, and this person ends their journey for this limitless, endless seeking of anityam. And therefore, this is what we call emotional maturity. This takes time. In fact, just to listen to this implies a certain level of maturity has been gained to the point where you understand this anityam. In fact, we can all relate to anityam, can we not? We're all experts in anityam. We all know anityam very well. In fact, what the verse is really saying here, because at this point, Shivano, because at this point, it's really saying what we're discerning is nitya, what we don't know, and anitya, what we do know. So obviously, we have to find out what is nityam. Okay, Shiva?
So is anityatvam in this loka nityam?
Yeah, anitya tvam. So tvam is a state of. So a state of pursuing, being in a state of pursuing or giving value to anityam. So this tvam is, very simple, state of anitya.
But is that nityam? Is that permanent?
That is anitya. Yeah, that is impermanent. So anitya means impermanent.
No, is the impermanence permanent?
Is the no, because we're discerning here, we're applying Viveka. There is nitya, permanent, and there is anitya, impermanent.
But that is to the individual, right? But in this loka, is that always sorry?
No, this is universal. This is universal. What we're speaking is about reality, and reality is, for the reality to be known as it is, we have to categorize this reality, which cannot really be categorized, but for the sake of mind categorizing, we say there is a permanent aspect of reality and there is an impermanent aspect of reality. Okay.
Thank you.
Okay, so this is not for the individual. This is universal. This is true at all 3 periods of time. This discernment. So this means 50 cycles creation ago, right? Universe, the whole entire universe. 50 versions of universe before today, before this cycle. This inquiry was exactly the same as it is now. And this inquiry will still apply what? 50 versions of universes later. So when this universe goes through a macrocosmic dissolution, and then it again, Big Bang, and then again, Big Bang, and then dissolution, like that, no matter when, in what universe this inquiry is applied, whether you apply this inquiry in heaven or Brahma Loka or any world, Patala, Vitala, Sutala, wherever you want to apply it, it is always going to be applicably true. It's always going to be true. You understand the importance of this? So this means, suppose now, there's beings, suppose a being comes from some random planet and they say, we've got something better than you have. We've got something better than you have. What does a smart student say?
Still such a mid-share relationship.
Yeah, good. So a smart student chases them away. They just kind of turn, they go get an ice cream because an ice cream is more interesting than hearing someone tell you, hey, we've got something better. So this is, otherwise we wouldn't be teaching this. What's the point of teaching this unless, it is universally applicable and cannot be negated. It cannot be contradicted. Okay. Therefore, it is true all the time. Okay. So, now what do we have here? Now, nityam. Nityam is what? Nityam, if anitya is impermanent, then nityam is what? Yeah, what obtains in 3 periods of time and never undergoes any change whatsoever. It is always true. It is always true as itself. It will never be anything else other than itself. Okay? Now, suppose just, just for instance, we say that you, Atma, you are nityam, okay? You are nityam. Just suppose we say that. This word I is Atma. I am nityam. And suppose we say nityam, and suppose we also say that nityam is what is the truth. Suppose we say nityam is the ultimate truth, the truth of the entire time, space, earth, fire, everything. So everything is ultimately nityam. And you happen to be nityam. Suppose we say that. And now I say to you, nityam, or suppose you say nityam can be produced. I'm going to produce an experience. And when that experience is produced, I will know myself. Right? When I go through an experience, like a yogic experience, or I have some kundalini raising, right? And I will have an experience, I will then produce enlightenment. I will produce liberation. I will produce the real I, the real self. Is that a valid statement? Can you produce nityam? Why not? Why can you not produce nityam? Go on.
And because if you can produce it, then it can end, and that is the change of the state.
Excellent. So in other words, good, excellent, very well done. So in other words, if it's produced, it is anityam. Therefore, you can never produce yourself. You cannot produce yourself. If you produce yourself, then what about you? Suppose you produce a clone of yourself. Then you say, well, geez, this clone is wonderful. I want to be this clone. Then what about you? Now I want to destroy this clone. They're better than I am. Okay? Nityam is eternity, is that which is eternal. Can you produce eternity? No, because eternity is already true right now. That's what eternity means. Yes? Okay? Eternity means it is not subject to time. It is ever true right now. Therefore, where is the question of producing what is eternal? You understand this? Can you produce eternity? If you produce eternity, what does that mean? It began. That means it's not eternal. So what does eternal mean? Eternal means it is true already right here, right now, which means what? Nityam, that which is eternal, cannot be produced. It can be rather what? It cannot be produced, but it can be what?
Understood.
Understood, discovered. That means it's already the truth right now, right here. I cannot produce eternity because by definition, that which is eternal never starts. It will never start in the future. It will never start, when I'm older. Let's go to Vanaprastha or sannyasi stage, and then it's going to start. Okay? If it starts, it's anityam. Therefore, there's no question of starting liberation. There's no question of starting moksha. It is a matter of what? Discovering what is true here and now, and always was true, always will be true, will never not be true, and that is to be discovered. Therefore, nityam is now. How do we know about this nityam? Suppose, right, we're first timers here. We're all first timers, and we only know about anityam. What is impermanent? How do you now have any connection to nityam? Because to be looking at this by definition implies to be a seeker, to be looking for the truth. How do we know nityam if one is not in touch with nityam? If one doesn't know nityam, how are they to know nityam? How do they come to know nityam then?
The Upanishad.
Through Upanishads, excellence. And this is good, Lena. This is what Meena was saying, right? How does one, how does one gain this Viveka, right? It's the same question like asking, how does one recognize or come to know about nityam? Because you hear it in the Shastra. Therefore, what does this mean? An initial requirement is required. An initial faith is required. Because suppose, like the microscope tells you, there is a world waiting for you to peek through. If you just move your eye onto the microscope and you look at that mitochondria, it's a whole world. And you say, I don't believe it. Are you ever going to discover it? No. In other words, there is a certain level of trust that has to be given to the scriptures so that the scriptures, which state there is this nityam, this reality called nityam, owing to my trust, I put my trust into that scripture and I go through the scriptural method to show me how it is so, how it is true. Therefore, it does require a certain level of trust. In fact, we said some time ago, we said Shraddhavan labate jnanam, right? Shraddhavan labate jnanam. So in other words, by obtaining faith, what will I gain? I will gain knowledge, okay? So it is faith alone that gives you knowledge, right? If one doesn't have faith or a certain level of trust, then no matter what the scriptures say, what is there to say, right? The person is just going to walk away and say, this is all nonsense. This sounds like nonsense. Okay? So the scriptures tell you that there is nityam. And what happens when we hear about nityam? We say, okay, now let's listen. Let's listen what this nityam is. All right. Okay, there is, okay, how are we doing? Any questions? There is some books written. One of them is Experience of Immortality. Would you like to read that? Would you like to read a book called Experience of Immortality? It's called Anubhava. No, Amritam Anubhava. I think it's Bhava Anubhava. Amritam is immortality. Anubhava. And this book talks about this fella who has experienced immortality. Now you go, oh, this is really intriguing. I want to read this book. And then you read this book, and then this fella talks about how he or she went through an experience, in the mountains, in the Himalaya mountains, and they say how it's all beautiful. And you're reading this experience, and you go, wow, I want that, And this person then says, because I experienced eternity for 30 minutes, I am enlightened. I have a stamp of liberation. And then the Vedantic student comes up and says, I'm highly skeptical of this. Okay, I'm highly skeptical of this because I just heard that you cannot experience eternity, because to experience eternity means it has started. What starts is not eternal, it is anityam. Another book, some other fella recommends you a book called Surefire Ways to Success and God Realization. Wow, what a title, huh? Surefire Ways to Success and God Realization. And then again, you apply your discriminative inquiry. You go, wait a minute, there's something fishy about this title. So what does this mean? Success. So what does success mean? That means success of the world, right? Become rich, have money, have some career, which is all okay. And one of those things is what? God realization. But just one of the many things is God realization. You can have both success and also God realization. You see these statements? These are books, I tell you. Books written like this by masters, so-called masters. And the person just reads these books. They don't apply the Viveka, the discriminative inquiry, and they just fall for it. And what happens? Postponement. Spiritual postponement. The more words one recognizes and sees like this, the more their journey gets postponed. And then you come onto a word which you've heard before, self-realization. You heard this before? Self-realization. This is the most common word that is linked up to moksha. Now think about this. Again, we're applying some thinking here. When you use the word realize, when do you use the word realize? In what kind of examples do you use the word realize? I just realized that I didn't lock the door. Hold on, I'm going to lock the door. Come back. Gone. Oh, I just realized the time is almost 4, almost 3:30. Okay, 4, whatever. We use these words just like that. And then we say, realize the self. Okay, just one more thing. Let me just realize the self. Okay, done. Move on. You see how the words are used irresponsibly? Self-realization. Oh, I just realized that I've been sitting a little bit crookedly. I need to sit straight. Hold on. Okay, let's continue. Gone. Self-realize. And then you come to self-realization. Okay, let's realize the self. Done. One of the many things. The self also becomes one of the many things to realize. There's no self-realization. There's only self-knowledge. Self-knowledge. Self is to be known, not realized. If you realize something, it's a one-off. It's just a little quick, little small thing. Okay, cool. I realize, yep, I'm the self, move on. There's no substance there. There's only self-knowledge. The self-knowledge, we use words like Brahmavidya, right? Knowledge of Brahman, Atmanyanam, knowledge of Atman, Tattvabodha. Tattvabodha is a great name. Tattvabodha. We're doing Tattvabodha now. Knowledge of reality. But there's no self-realization. Okay? So what are we doing here? Why am I saying this? To be careful how our words are used, because we create psychological barriers by just using these words, throwing them around just because everyone else is using them. Okay, so this is a quality of an adhikari. They are conscious of what words they use in reference to the reality. This is why the teacher is required, because the teacher always corrects us in reference to some of the things that we may have just unconsciously kind of enacted. Okay, so nitya anitya vastu vivekaha. Okay, so sadhana chatushtayam kim. What is the first aspect of sadhana chatushtaya? It is a discriminative inquiry of what is nitya and anitya. And notice, by the way, that I'm not translating directly using permanent and impermanent. Some words are better left untranslated. You understand? They're better left untranslated. So nityam, okay, yes, it is that which obtains in all 3 periods of time. It never changes. And anityam is what does not obtain in the 3 periods of time. It is subject to fluctuation. Okay, so it's better to rather understand than giving you this one-off word, permanent and impermanent. Okay.
Can I ask a question?
Yes, please. Who's speaking?
Sukyong.
Hi.
So I'm a little confusing. So can I say that the moksha is the faith of knowledge of faith? You know, moksha is moksha faith. Nothing else is faith, because faith of knowledge of reality is faith. Because
okay. Okay. No. You go on.
Yeah. So moksha, I thought the moksha is, you know, alternate freedom, you know, absolute freedom. Yet, if you cannot experience ever, then how can I put with the, and I don't know how to explain that. It's just like sounds like what you were just saying is that moksha is just faith.
Okay, I understand. So yes, so for the knowledge to see, we start out, what's the problem here? The problem is ignorance. The fact is you, right? Your nature is eternal. You are eternal right now. That's the truth. That is a fact. Okay. Now, in order to discover that, in order to own that, right? Have no doubts about that. What's required? Faith in the knowledge, which is meant to remove the notion that you are what? A small being, a small temporary mortal being. Okay, so what's the problem? The problem is I believe I am a mortal being. I will die. I will go through pain. I will go through. I have merits and demerits accumulated onto my life. All of these things, right, is what one believes, but that is not true. Okay, it's like the crystal. Okay, they believe that these conditions are belonging to itself. That is not true. It has nothing to do with the crystal. So in order for the crystal to understand that it is free of this person called So Kyung, okay, it is completely free of this personality, of this individuality, then for that to happen, this person called So Kyung has to have a certain amount of faith for this knowledge to work upon the mind so that the mind can drop these notions that keep on associating self with all of these conditions, with all of these changes. They keep on associating self, which is eternal, with what is anitya, right? Anitya. So that's mine. No, it's not yours. So to come to that point, a certain faith is required, a certain trust in the words of the scriptures is required for that to take place. Okay, just to simplify this, suppose a teacher wants to show you that you can, like Vedic mathematics, right? It's a very quick way to calculate Vedic mathematics, okay? And you come from a Western school, and to calculate, right, we go through these long methods of calculation. And then the Vedic teacher comes up and says, hey, I can show you some shortcut ways to quickly calculate. And you say what to them? Okay, I will listen long enough until I learn this method. Okay, so that's called faith. You have faith in the teacher, in the teaching.
This concept of moksha and how to achieve moksha. and the various techniques involved, right? If we could apply it to our daily life. So, for example, I'm seeking moksha from my dependence on tobacco, and I'm ready for it. I don't know whether I'm qualified, but I feel ready for it. But the fact that I'm having Viveka with regards to the values I've associated with my dependence on tobacco.
Okay.
Could we use these things as like a metaphor or a practical project thought experiment for whatever we are seeking moksha from?
Okay, so now, the word moksha has different definitions. In this case, see, what you're talking about is something that you have a value for. Okay, it helps you, I guess, tobacco, right? It helps you in some way. Is this fair to say?
Yes.
Okay, good. So so no one has the right to dispute that, right? That is a fair statement. It helps you. So we could say that it helps your mind. It helps to keep your mind, give it a certain composure, a certain level of relaxation, which is fine, right? Which is fine. However, what we're talking about now, look at this. Everyone has some dependence. We can all admit we all have one dependence on the other. Some people have, dependence on books. Some have dependence on going out, dependence on food. What's the difference? It's just all dependence. So you leave dependence alone. Dependence is there, okay? So what we're talking about is, despite your dependence, moksha that we're talking about is other than that, is other than your dependence. Moksha is something else, okay? Moksha is something other than your dependence. It's not quite connected to your dependence. Your dependence is okay. It gives your mind some sanity. But moksha is freedom from sense of limitation, freedom from rebirth, freedom from what you are not, freedom from this person who is concerned, freedom from this person that has the need to ask questions, freedom from this person who has a need to kind of, have worry about the future, freedom from this person who's afraid of dying, freedom from the person called Vig, freedom from your background, from anything that you think about yourself, freedom from all of that. You understand? So the word moksha that we're describing is not quite put in the context of tobacco or going out or having some eating kind of addiction. This is all fine. In fact, we've got nothing against that, right? Because that is just all personal. It's all personal. But moksha is beyond that. It kind of puts that aside, and we talk about what is this freedom that we are speaking of. Okay, so what I'm asking is, as we delve deeper into this, let's see what we are really talking about when we say moksha. We're just having like an introduction now, a little kind of introduction, opening up a possibility. Vig, what do you have to say to that?
Yep, understood. I hear what you're saying, but I know, it's just an introduction, but, I was just thinking whether we could apply it to some of the things that, I guess, peel us away from what is real and what is not. So is the dependence on something real or not? While I might...
And we will apply it. Now, is there any guarantee that the dependence will go away? There is no guarantee, because we're talking about a lifelong addiction, right? Lifelong addiction is there. Some people may carry on with it. We have wise people who are liberated and they still have funny habits, right? They're not concerned about it because it's a habit of the body. It's a habit of your mind. Okay. So we will see how to apply it and how it actually does help us. Nenu.
Thank you.
Nenu?
Yeah. So will it be right if I think that, if I say that moksha is just the state of my being, what I am, just a state of the being right now?
It is. Yeah, it is the truth. It is what you are right now, despite all of these questions and this person called Nenu. So it is freedom from the person called Nenu, who has a concern to know what is moksha and what is not moksha. You understand? It's now we have to talk about what is this to understand. But moksha is, as I said, there's two definitions: freedom from what you are not, freedom from sorrow, from concern, from doubts, from worries, from age, from physiological functions, psychological functions, from emotions, from need to think, from the need to kind of, worry, freedom from death, freedom from fear, okay, freedom from joy, and all, because all of these things are what that I just said. What's common with all of these things that I just said?
Temporary. Anitya.
Excellent. Good. They're all anityam. Therefore, freedom from experience of one more. Freedom from all of that. That is what I am not, according to the verse so far. Okay, freedom from what I am not. And second definition of moksha is freedom from rebirth. Okay, so in other words, what's the point of doing all of this if the individual is to be born again and do the whole thing next life again? That means we're wasting our time. You understand? That means we're wasting our time. Let's, do something more interesting. Like just sitting down on a Sunday, Saturday, right? So it is freedom from the need to come back to take on another limited form, another limited form for the next 90 years. In fact, the irony is we celebrate birth, right? Oh, cute baby, right? A new baby is born. If you look at this is not worthy of celebration, because in actuality, what's coming? You've got 90 years of problems, basically 90 years of, maybe a couple of years of kind of, in the lap of your parents, feeling really safe and secure and warm and cozy. No need to worry about money. It's all taken care of for you. You don't know about any problems in the world. Your parents protect you. You're in a nice, warm nest. It feels so good to be there in those few years. By the time we hit 11, 12, 13, we've got Viparinamate, which we will talk about, the metamorphosis stage. Oh man, that is when everything changes. Your voice changes, our body starts to change. Our kind of addictions from suddenly start to arise. Hormones start to come. Then we have to deal with all of these other human beings. It's just, oh my God, get me out of here. Okay, so in other words, freedom from having your teeth drilled and having the injections put into your mouth and with a numb mouth. Okay, and then going hungry and then waking up in the middle of the night with a nightmare and then going, oh, mommy, protect me. Oh, I just peed in my bed. Oh, clean it. And then go through the drama of getting another girlfriend, boyfriend, and then getting dumped. And then again, hopefully this time it will work out. And now you have to support, your job and your kids. And now your kids get you into trouble. And then you have to go to school and then take your own kids and talk to the principal. And then the principal says, okay, hopefully we'll keep them under check. And you come home and then your dog suddenly pissed on the carpet and you have to clean that. And then you go through old age and then your back you need the crutches. And when you get your crutches, it breaks and then you fall again. And now I get you to the hospital and then you're in a hospital. Now your children are not coming to visit. Now you feel lonely. What are my children? They don't love me. And then death. And then repeat. It's just nonsense. So freedom from all of this nonsense. So this is what moksha is, okay? Enjoying one's limitless nature as oneself, being everything all the time, beyond time, at the same time. The truth of all things I am. That is what moksha is. Never again to be reborn with this limited form, but rather enjoying one's limitless ananda, which we will talk about. What is this limitless ananda, okay? Okay, hopefully that then makes it clear. All right. So now what happens here? After we have gained this Viveka, okay, so we have applied, we have recognized that beyond all of these impermanents, what I'm really seeking is the permanent truth, which is beautiful, which is limitless, which is not limited by anything whatsoever. I'm seeking freedom from any form of limitations. Okay. Once this Viveka has sort of come, right, in some degree or the other, what happens then? Then the person develops. Now, next line. Iha. Okay, I will go first. You can go follow after me. Iha mutrartha pala bhoga viragaha. Okay, so it's iha amutra artha pala bhoga. Okay, now just go to the last word, viragaha. Viragaha. Now, another popular word is vairagya. Vairagya, they say it's dispassion. But, we don't need to use dispassion. You probably heard this word before. Viraga is, you see, there are two conditions, right, that each individual goes through, and we all experience this. We have aversions for things, right? We have aversions. We just find some things really repulsive, and they just don't vibe. They don't vibe with us. They just don't kind of click with us. You just kind of don't find yourself compatible with some things. You don't know why, but you just don't kind of get along with it. Okay, this is called dvesha. These are called aversions, or just dislikes. Okay, dislikes for certain things. And now the second one is called raga. This is the other side. Raga is whereby you have a strong, unexplainable attraction for something. You don't know why, but it's there, right? It's just very addictive. It's kind of, you find yourself pulled back to it. You don't want to leave it alone. You think about it all the time. It gives you comfort. It gives you, makes your life worth living. It is something that we are just kind of very attracted to. We cannot explain why, again. We don't have to explain why, but it's an experience that we can all relate with. In other words, we have a like for something, a like, okay? So likes and dislikes. And this is everyone's experience. We all have likes and dislikes, and then we live according to these likes and dislikes. We generally get all of our dislikes out of our life, and we surround ourselves with a lot of likes, okay? And this is what we call living a good life, okay? So what is a good life? Surrounding yourself with a bunch of ragas, and kind of you're chasing away dveshas, chasing away things that are just not pleasant. This is how we all live. And now when it says viraga, it is actually, what it actually means is not getting caught up in this constant need to live a life according to raga and dvesha, because this is so overpowering that the person will sometimes sacrifice their well-being for what? For that which they really, really like. And they will chase away those things which are actually healthy, but just because the person has an aversion for it, they will chase it away. In other words, one will compromise one's well-being in the name of an aversion, in the name of a dvesha. So now, when it says viraga, it is, what it means is it's an absence of longing. Okay, not dispassion, it's an absence of longing. Now, what does this mean when you say absence of longing? Absence of longing for what? Okay, it is an absence of longing for artha pala bhoga. So in other words, there is an absence of longing for objects which provide me pleasant experiences, objects which provide me enjoyments, objects which by their presence make my life worthwhile. Okay, so there's an absence of longing for that. There's an absence of hoarding for things that are just that according to your own likes and dislikes will, according to your idea, give you a good life. So this is a viragaha, absence or releasing the longing for bhoga, for enjoyment of what? Enjoyment of objects and the results that these objects can give. Okay, so what does this mean? It means that how do we usually live our life? Okay, we say, okay, so is this going to give me a good time? If someone says yes, we go. Is this going to give me a good time? Well, we're not quite sure. Okay, then I'm not going to go. Okay, this is our usual kind of general more or less way. So if something you think it's going to give you a good time, then you say yes. If something is not going to give a good time or may potentially give a good time, if I'm not quite certain, I will say no. So what this is saying is what you do is you subserve. What the individual does is they subserve their constant likes and dislikes in the name of what is really to be done. What is really to be done. And what is to be done in this context? It is to discern nitya and anitya. Okay. So in other words, having this viveka, discriminated inquiry of what is passing, what will only give a temporary level of satisfaction, owing to that discernment, what does it naturally induce? What kind of thing does it give you? It gives you a sense of no longer longing for anityam. So do you understand what now this viraga means? So suppose we use the word dispassion. Dispassion is not developed. You cannot develop dispassion. That's fake. Dispassion is a byproduct of what? Viveka. You understand? To develop dispassion, what's the problem? Suppose you want to develop dispassion. You know what's going to happen? That's called weird spiritualists. What happens, you feel it like cold, apathetic, non-interested, not willing to talk, kind of ignoring you, and you just feel like, hey, I want to talk to you. I want to be a friend. And there's just like this push, like, no, I am dispassionate. I don't need to get involved because, I am trying to build and stay dispassionate. This is not what viraga is. Viraga is a product of a discerning mind. Discerning mind of what? Of nityam and anityam. If the discernment is there, what's the byproduct of that? Viraga, not longing for those things that are meant and constantly designed or meant to give me what? Enjoyments where? Iha amutra, not only in this world, but also amutra in the next world, in heaven, in other worlds. You understand? So in other words, by having viveka, the person develops this viraga, this sense of not longing, because they are using their mind. They're sharp enough to know this is only going to give me so much enjoyment. It's not worth the pursuit. And therefore, I'm going to redirect my energy into something that matters, something that is a lot more important for me. Hopefully it is moksha. Okay. So this is viraga. Okay, now next week we will talk about Shamadhi, Shatka, Sampattihi, and Mumukshutvam. We'll talk about sixfold virtues, and the nature or the qualities of one who is desirous of moksha. What kind of language does a person who is desirous of moksha use? Okay, what is going on in their mind that makes them a true mumukshu? We will see that. All right, so any questions, comments, observations before we close?
Andre, I had a question. Mr. Jay, just had a question. Andre, so in this scenario, is Kundalini awakening just another experience?
Kundalini awakening is another experience because it's anitya, because it was not there yesterday and it now, suddenly is going to come. And also this Kundalini is just a name that we give to some kind of upliftment. We'll call it just upliftment, right? The person's being uplifted. Maybe something happened. We don't really, mind if it did happen or not happen, but they happen to be uplifted through some experience. And to explain that, we just assign the word. We call it Kundalini raising, okay? But just to keep it simple, the person enjoyed some level of kind of upliftment, some experience that felt pleasant, and then they call it Kundalini. Now, Kundalini, of course, is also, it's for the most part, it's just imagination. This fella thinks there's a sleeping serpent in the Muladhara chakra, and now it rises up the Shushumna, it blows up, in the Sahasrara, and then something happens, right? So this is, the mind can really turn anything into an amazing fantasy, okay? So we just call it, for simplicity, there's an upliftment, but this upliftment, like any other thing, is just temporary, and life continues. The problem has still not been removed, because the problem is the person still doesn't know who they are, right? They're still looking. Now they want another Kundalini experience. In other words, the problem has not been solved, okay? So they're still looking for what? Another anityam. In fact, anyone who's had a Kundalini experience, if you listen to their experience, they will say, I've had a Kundalini experience. Just to mention something means it was a big deal. Now, what kind of things do we mention? Things that are anityas. That's all we ever talk about in our life. We always bring up what is anitya. So just to bring up Kundalini is just to make it another anitya, like any other. Therefore, we say, this is lovely. You've had a Kundalini experience, but now let's talk about Vedanta. Let's talk about removal of ignorance that we will continue next week. Okay.
So how does a person who has attained moksha live in the day-to-day life? How would he be? One who is free from all the likes, dislikes, from all aversions. If like someone is rude to him, it shouldn't affect him. How would he respond, and how would others treat him in the social scenario? Like, would he be ignored, or I just wonder how it would be for that person.
There is still a mind, Nenu. There's still a mind. There's still a personality. And this personality will still acts like any other time, okay? So if the personality was sort of huggy, goes around the world hugging people, for example, this personality will still hug people, okay? So now if someone says, oh, they're so active, they're so engaged in the world, they're not kind of sitting in a mountain, they're not liberated. This is a mistake of what? So that, in other words, the person thinks that a wise person is supposed to act in a certain way, but acting is a different order of reality. It is the order of personality. We're not talking about self-knowledge. So nothing really changes, Nenu. That's the thing. The life continues exactly the same. The person gets treated exactly. He's still a daughter and a son to your mom and dad. They still see you as as their dear loved daughter, little boy, and so on. Your siblings still see you exactly the same. Colleagues still treat you exactly the same. No one really sees anything, because why? We're looking at the body. The body doesn't give away anything. What can the body give away, right? But it's an understanding. If you understand, for example, physics, I don't know that. I don't know that, but you know that. So in other words, I just look at you as a normal person, but you have a certain understanding, and I cannot see that because I only see your physical body. So nothing really changes, Nenu. And this is the thing that most people have to get this idea that a liberated person is supposed to have maybe a halo on their head, or supposed to be treated. And, they sort of have this, everyone's attracted to them, and like they're, smiley all the time. So this, we will also, specifically in this book, we will break down these, these notions that unfortunately postpone one's journey. Okay.
Can I ask a question? If vairagya is absence of longing, right, then the rag, which is to read the scriptures, that longing to read the scriptures or understand them, does that cause a problem in sadhana chatushti?
No. So this is absence of longing for the impermanent. And now, to understand the permanent, one needs the knowledge, and the knowledge comes through the scriptures. Okay, so we are obsessed for longing for toys that no longer sort of, serve you, and you recognize that, just like, an adult no longer has a longing for childhood toys. It's the same idea. Okay, but the knowledge is still there. The knowledge, the love for knowledge is still there. Purnamadam Purnamidam Purnat Purnamudachyate Purnasya Purnamadaya Purnameva Avashishyate. Om Shanti Shanti Shanti.